Okay, folks, welcome to this meeting of the Northern Shrimp section. I'm Doug Grout. I'm the governor's appointee from New Hampshire. Our tasks today are to hear and review 2024 stock assessment update. Then we will be reviewing and making a decision on the pilot winter sampling proposal and setting our fishery specifications for 2025. And finally, we need to review and consider approval of draft amendment 4 for public comment. First of all, is there any changes to this agenda that anybody would like to make? Seeing none, I'm going to consider the agenda approved. And now we have an opportunity for public comment, and this is for public comment that is not on the agenda, on items that are not on the agenda. So we're going to be taking comment on the sampling program, specifications, amendment 4, questions on the update. But if there's anything else that anybody is not on the agenda, this is your opportunity. Is there anybody online? Raising their hand? No? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move right into the 2024 stock assessment update. And I'm going to turn this over to Katie Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll be presenting the Northern Shrimp stock assessment update. This was given earlier, so I apologize for a duplication for anybody who was here for the AP, but here we go. So today I'm just going to be covering the data that we use, the results of the assessment, and the projections that we did for the assessment to inform the winter sampling program. So in terms of the data, new data that we have, the previous full assessment, that is the assessment that used the model, was completed in 1984, was completed in 2021 with data that ran from 1984 through 2021. We are able to add a few more years of data to this time series with this assessment update. The only data that we have for 2024, unfortunately, is the Maine, New Hampshire Spring Inshore Trawl Survey. The 1984 to 2023 data are the same data that were presented in the 2023 data update, but they've just been run through the model now. So that includes the summer survey, which ran from 1984 to 2023. 2023 was the last year of that survey. It has been suspended for the foreseeable future. And so that's the end of that time series. The Northeast Fisheries Science Center fall survey, we should have usually gotten the 2023 data by now at this point, but unfortunately, they have not been able to process the 2023 shrimp samples due to staffing limitations, and as a result, the time series for that index ends in 2022. Right there, and we have also have no new catch data for 2022 to 2024. The research sampling program has happened sporadically since the full moratorium, and those data are included, but we don't have any new data on that front. So I'm going to run through some of our available data, the most recent few years. This is the Maine, New Hampshire Spring Survey Index. As you can see, we are at very low levels, below that 20th percentile of the stable period, and I think one of the lowest on record that we've ever had for this survey. In addition, the length structure of the survey was very limited. We only had the female cues in the catch. We did not see any small shrimp in this survey. So on the left here is 2023, and on the right is 2024. These are on different axes, and you can see there's basically an order or two of magnitude difference between those axes. But basically, you can see previously we did have some down to around 20 millimeter shrimp, including some of the males and some of the transitionals. But for 2024, we did not see any of those small shrimp at all. This is the ASOSC summer survey, which ends in 2023 at extremely low values for both total abundance and for recruitment. And if we look at This is 2023 data for the Maine, New Hampshire survey on the top and the summer survey on the bottom. And you can see both of these surveys did not catch any shrimp smaller than 20 millimeters. We usually do, on the summer survey, we see recruitment at around 15 or 16 millimeters, and you're not seeing any of that in the survey in 2023. So likely due to the very low catch rates overall that we're seeing. So this is the Northeast Fisheries Science Center fall survey, the Bigelow years, and you can see that this has continued to decline as well. The other new source, or the other updated source of data that we have, is the Predation Pressure Index, the PPI. Usually this is done for us by staff at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, our technical committee representative. We don't currently have a Science Center representative on the TC, so we were able to use the publicly available data sets for the fall survey to recreate the stratified mean biomass indices for our predator species, and basically recreate that predation pressure index ourselves, meaning that the TC will be able to continue to develop this index into the future without the Science Center support. It is a pretty heavy lift. We have I think about 10 to 15 species in there, of predator species in there, so we need those stratified indices updated for the specific strata that we use in the Gulf of Maine in order to maintain this. But it appears that we'll be able to do this in the future. So we were able to update that all the way through 2023. The 2023 fall indices are available for the predator species, just not for northern shrimp. So you can see that's part of our environmental traffic light approach. And so you can see we are here in the predation pressure index. It was high for a couple of years. It's dropped a little bit in 2023, but still above that 80th percentile. Similarly, summer bottom temperature, spring bottom temperature, and the winter surface temperature are all have also been high in recent years, continuing that sort of upward trend in temperature that we're seeing as well, to go along with this upward trend in predator biomass. So due to the limited data for 2024, the technical committee chose to use 2023 as the terminal year of the assessment in order to provide sort of the most robust estimate of population size going forward. We also used the Maine, New Hampshire index in the base run, which will be necessary for future updates without that summer survey. This will make comparisons with the future updates easier, but it does represent a change from the base model from previous assessment updates. So in terms of results, spawning stock biomass is at very low levels with a continued decline from where we were in 2021, the last time we did this update. F is also at very low levels with 0 catch, 0 F in recent years. And recruitment is at very low levels in recent years. So you can see we're just barely bumping up above the x-axis here in terms of recruitment. And just looking at sort of deviations from the mean, we've noted this before in other assessments, but you can kind of see this regime shift from prior to 2000. We had less variability overall, but from 2000 forward, we've had more variability that is higher highs and lower lows. So we had a period of high recruitment from the early 2000s to about 2010. And after 2010, we've just been seeing continued declines in recruitment. In terms of the retrospective analysis, SSB is overestimated in recent years. It looks like there's been a little bit of a shift in that, in terms of previously underestimating and now overestimating. Similarly, F is underestimated in recent years when there are removals to estimate. And recruitment is more variable, but generally has been overestimated in recent years. So the terminal year is kind of overestimating the amount of recruitment that we see. In terms of model comparisons, so again, our base model here has a terminal year of 2023 with the Maine, New Hampshire survey in it. We also looked at some other runs of extending that terminal year to 2024, as well as whether or not we include or exclude the Maine, New Hampshire survey to understand how these sort of data choices are affecting the results. And I'm going to show some graphs on this, but just overall, including the Maine, New Hampshire survey results in a slightly higher SSB and a slightly lower F over the time series, but trends in recent years are very similar. Without the Maine, New Hampshire index in 2024, the model has no observations about recruitment, so it's not getting, there's no summer survey, there's no fall survey, there's no catch data. So the model really has no observations about recruitment without the Maine, New Hampshire survey. And as a result, it kind of, you can see the recruitment's going to bump up if you don't include it. But with the Maine, New Hampshire, the model estimates a low recruitment in 2024, more consistent with what we've seen from other data sources. So just looking at the figures real quick, you can see, so in the blue and the black are the runs with the Maine, New Hampshire survey. The spawning stock or fishing mortality shows a similar pattern, with adding the Maine, New Hampshire data makes that fishing mortality come down historically, but obviously we're still at very low levels, including 0 in recent years due to the moratorium. And similarly, the real difference that you can see for recruitment is here, this orangish dot is the 2024 model without the Maine, New Hampshire survey, and then the blue dot is with the Maine, New Hampshire survey. So you can see that without the Maine, New Hampshire survey, the model just puts recruitment back to the average. And with the Maine, New Hampshire survey, it can see that lack of small shrimp and brings that recruitment back down closer to what it's been historically. But this is just to give you an idea of the effects of sort of the different terminal year, 23 versus 24, and the different data sets using the 2020, using the 2024 and not using 2024, as well as using Maine, New Hampshire and not using Maine, New Hampshire. So in terms of stock status, we don't have formal reference points for this stock. The TC concluded that northern shrimp in the Gulf of Maine remain depleted, with spawning stock biomass in 2023 estimated at 279 metric tons, the lowest value in the time series. Recruitment continues to be low, with 2022 and 2023 year classes being the lowest in the time series. Environmental conditions remain unfavorable, with high predation levels and high water temperature. Fishing mortality has been very low in recent years due to the moratorium, but that high natural mortality and the low recruitment have hindered rebuilding. The technical committee recommends that the section extend the moratorium on fishing, but the TC is not opposed to a limited winter sampling program. We did some long-term and short-term projections. These long-term projections are basically just showing that SSB will stabilize somewhere, but it kind of depends on the natural mortality and the recruitment that the species is experiencing. Under current conditions, that is that high natural mortality and low spawning stock biomass, you'll stabilize at very low levels, kind of where we are right now, maybe a little lower. If we're able to go back to kind of our long-term mean conditions, we will see an increase, but it just depends on what the future environmental conditions are going to look like for this species. In terms of short-term projections, SSB is projected to decline in 2025, even at F equals 0. Any increase in F in 2025 will result in a lower SSB, but the reduction is small for low levels of catch. So what we are comparing here is different levels of catch that are roughly equivalent to research set aside either catches or caps that existed in the past during when we had the research program, ranging from 0 metric tons all the way up to 53 metric tons. 53 metric tons is the highest cap that was ever allowed under the research sampling program, but was never actually ever reached by the program. And then you can see the probability that SSB in 2025 will be greater than the probability, will be greater than SSB in 2023 is 0 across the board. We're expecting about a 54% decline from 2023 levels to 2025, even without fishing at all. And going down to the highest catch that that 53 metric tons, if that were removed, we'd end up 13% lower than we would compared to F equals 0. going down to about the 6.7 metric tons, which I think is what the TC recommended for the winter sampling program, and you end up at about slightly less than a 2% change relative to not fishing at all. So that's all I have for the assessment, and I'm happy to take any questions on the assessment. I think we'll pivot to talking about the sampling program and the AP recommendations after that.
Are there any questions from section members? Seeing none. Any questions that weren't already answered for the people who are here for the AP meeting? Seeing none. I think we can move on. Thank you very much, Katie. That was excellent. I think we can move on to the winter sampling proposal, pilot winter sampling proposal. I think it sounds like you and Chelsea are going to do a tag team on this.
I think, yeah.
After you do that, we'll have the advisory input from Gary Libby.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the pilot winter sampling program that the technical committee developed and 2025 specifications, as well as the advisory panel report, which Gary will cover later. He's the chair of our AP. Again, apologies for anyone that was here earlier. This is the same presentation, so you will get to hear it twice. In September of 2024, the Northern Shrimp Section tasked the technical committee to develop an RSA quota and pilot winter sampling program for section consideration at the winter 2024 meeting, which is this meeting that we're at today, to be implemented in early 2025. And then as a second priority task, the section tasked the technical committee to explore the potential for and effort required of participants for a summer shrimp survey. And again, that's a second priority task that the TC will explore in 2025. So for the pilot winter sampling program, the technical committee met 3 times between September and December 2024 to develop the program and complete the stock assessment update. And the projections from that stock assessment update were used to inform the technical committee's RSA quota recommendation. The TC agreed that the program should run in a similar fashion to the previous research fishery, which happened between 2014 and 2017, except for this time, the TC thought that we should not seek to gather information on egg hatch timing to provide more flexibility for participants. In the previous research fishery, there was a little bit of an issue with timing when they were looking for that data. So because this is a pilot program, we wanted it to be a little bit more flexible. And then something else that's different about this program than the previous fishery is that there is no funding for this program, so it will be entirely self-funded by industry. The goal of the program is to collect samples similar to those that might have been collected from commercial shrimp catches if there was a fishery. So we're looking for, again, commercial data here as opposed to a survey. So at the time that the TC was meeting, we heard that industry members from Maine and Massachusetts have expressed interest in an industry-based, pilot winter sampling program, and the TC had recommended using the previous sampling regions and participant selection criteria. So in previous research fisheries, there were 4 regions. Those are defined on the screen here for trawlers. And those regions are Massachusetts through New Hampshire, Western Maine, Mid-Coast Maine, and Eastern Maine. And the goal is to have 1 to 2 trawlers assigned per region, given what the RSA quota ends up being. And then the TC recommended the selection of 1 to 4 trappers. So in terms of the participant selection criteria, the TC recommended that participants in the program should have a demonstrated expertise fishing for shrimp, that they should maintain the use of the size sorting grates for trawls congruent with Amendment 3 requirements, and during each trip, the captain should attempt to fish in locations where he/she would previously fish for shrimp. And then for participants in the program, for trawls, for each tow, the captain should record the date, the tow number, GPS coordinates of the tow start time and duration, the depth, the description of the grade, and the estimate of number of pounds of shrimp caught. And then for trips, including those where no samples are collected, the captain should report the date, number of traps in the string, GPS coordinates, number of set over days, depth, and an estimate of the number of pounds of shrimp caught. And then for vessels that have more advanced monitoring technology, any additional information would be helpful for the technical committee on location or any other information that is collected, but it's not a requirement of the program. So in terms of trip limits and trap limits, we had a little bit of a discussion at the AP earlier today about this. But the program is intended to run from January through March of 2025 or until the RSA quota is reached, whichever is sooner. But at the time of the technical committee discussion, trip limits, trap limits, and number of traps could not be determined because there was not an RSA quota to base those numbers off of. But I think, after some discussion today at the AP, we have a little bit better of an idea of what a quota might be and what a trip limit or a trap limit would be that would make it worth it for industry participants, particularly if the program is self-funded. And so finally, based on the short-term projections from the stock assessment update, the TC recommended an RSA quota between 0 and 6.7 metric tons. And the TC selected this number because under this scenario, SSB was projected to be less than 1% lower than the scenario with no fishing mortality. So the TC thought that this kind of balanced catch incentive with SSB impact. And then finally, now Gary is going to cover the AP report. So the AP received, for those that were in here earlier today, the AP received the same presentation and had some insights to provide about locations and trip limits, trap limits, and RSA quotas. And I'll let Gary take over the AP report and what their thoughts on the proposal were.
Okay. Slide one, just for clarification. Where you have the 4 regions defined?
Yes.
So I'm sorry. 1 to 4 tractor per region.
So the regions, these regions were previously just for trawlers. The TC didn't talk about regions for trappers because we didn't know what the interest was or how many participants would be able to be selected. So I think after today, when a quota is selected, the TC is going to have to meet again and establish, formal trip limits, trap limits, and potential regions for trappers. So the regions would just be for the trawls.
I think they were saying though no more than 4 trappers.
Oh yeah.
Fish in main water, southern main water, right? Well, they can fish out. Court lines.
All right, Gary, take it away.
Public hearing.
About this subject on sampling, but we did have a discussion where I brought up the dividing point between east and mid coast for the people that live in my town. Makes it a little more difficult for them because they traditionally fish. So that was the reason requesting the dividing line. And the recommendation of the metric tonnage, we all felt that 6.7 was too small. It wouldn't be worth it for the participants because there was more to pay for than just the fuel bill. That's probably nets and gear and stuff that they may have to invest in order to participate in the program. So we thought that number should be higher. And then we talked about potential, because we don't know what the RSA is, trip limits and for trappers and trawlers, which is based on what we did in sampling before, back 14 to 17. Now, I don't know what a limit should be, and I don't know because we really didn't get into how many days, because we don't know what the RSA's. And then we got down to the quota that I don't know what the RSA is. So all of the options on the board were, the highest one was 53 metric tons. And I just said, well, in order to get the participants, I thought probably that we should just ask for 53. And that way, at least people would say 6.7, oh, that's not enough, I'm gonna stay home. So my whole projection of that was ask for that and see what the RSA numbers come out. And the section's gonna have to make their decision there on that, because the information was lacking to really have a good recommendation in that. And I also was talking about risk most of the morning, because we're gonna take a risk if the stock is that low and we allow that many removals. We're risking crashing the stock, obviously, but if everything's wrong and we go out and get shrimp, then we're not risking much at all. So that's another decision for the section to decide risk without much data, because all of the stuff in the assessment prior to this for the recommendations was, this year they're based on that inshore trawl survey, and they're based on the Bigelow, which uses a groundfish net. So we have data for. So our numbers are skewed to start with. Maybe they're right. I can't question that, but there's a possibility they're not. And that from the fisherman's perspective, they feel that there possibly could be mistakes in that, and it's not in the working up of the data for the computer model. That's fine. Where our problem lies is the collection of the data, and that's why we want to participate in this program, so we can have good data fed into our models. And that way we can find out whether we have shrimp or we don't have shrimp. And that was pretty much what we talked about throughout the morning.
Thank you, Gary. Are there any questions the section has, either about the TC proposal or the AP's recommendations here? Allison?
Thank you for that. Did the AP have any problems or any questions about like where people would be fishing? You know, I think the recommendation was that people selected would fish where they previously fished.
Mostly that's what we assume will probably happen. People traditionally were selected from the area they lived in, because if you got to travel 50 miles to go to your zone, it's going to be a deterrent to even participate at that point. So most of when we did the sampling from 14 to 17, what we did was Port Clyde boats usually fished east of the Manhegan area. Guys from Pemaquid did the east coast. Guys from down the Portland area did Kittery. Obviously, the New Hampshire, Mass guys split up down that way. Because I'm not going to go to Mass or New Hampshire to make a sample if I'm a fisherman from Port Clyde. That's the idea of it, to lower the cost, and our traditional grounds are in those areas. Everyone has their favorite spots when you go, and even when you shrimp with something you did close to home because of weather. So that was the rationale behind selecting the spot. This is the slideshow.
I know.
Yeah.
Why would you see it?
Are there any questions on these items online? No? And are there any other questions that happen from the public here that haven't already been asked at the AP meeting?
I just wanted to mention that there's still some math here. I mean, at 116,844, and everybody, 4 lost votes and 4 traumas maxed out. I mean, 12 weeks and 3 months, that's gonna do like day and a week. Yeah, that's like all that, that's it. So we're looking to get any kind of timeline over 3 months. That's what we're looking at.
Okay. Good information. Okay, if there are no further questions, we're going to go into agenda item 6, which is setting the fisheries specifications. And just for the purpose of transparency, you notice there's 4 members here from New Hampshire. We have Senator Waters, who is our legislative commissioner, and Dennis Abbott, who is his ongoing proxy. And for the purpose of this particular, the 2 action items on this, Dennis will be doing the discussion and the caucusing of the delegation. Okay, that being said, we have any potential motions that somebody would like to put up concerning the 2025 fisheries specifications? Bob Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Just like to before I make the motion, if I might, I'd like to just qualify it a little bit and discuss, some of the thoughts. I think the section is at a little bit of a crossroads here. The section has done its due diligence by maintaining a moratorium on the northern shrimp stock for greater than a decade. And despite that, I think Katie, the TC today showed us a really compelling stock assessment that shows virtually all measurable trends for northern shrimp to be declining. Recruitment, SSB, the external indicators for predation and temperature, environmental factors are all near record highs. And from my perspective, I feel like we're seeing a stock that's, basically on the very edge of crashing, or it probably has crashed at this point, which leads me to, I think, given the fact that we've had no fishing mortality for over a decade, I think it's pretty clear that the primary thing that's driving stock dynamics right now are environmental factors, which to some extent really gives limited options for the section to manage and or take action that we would have a reasonable expectation to improve stock conditions. I think to some extent our options are very limited. And so, given those things, I also wanted to mention that I really appreciate the work that the TC has done. They've done a really excellent job of giving us a thorough stock assessment, giving us the information that we need, including the RSA projections. And I think those projections with their maximum recommended RSA of 6.7, I think that is made within the context of trying to give us an option that potentially does little or no harm to further harm to the stock. But with that, I also heard very compelling discussions from the AP this morning talking about the need for having at least enough RSA to be able to go out and make it worth their while to go out and take a look. And there's a disconnect there. I think this, from my perspective, the science is pretty compelling, but I think there's some uncertainty among the industry and wanting to do, as we've said in past meetings, that gut check. And so, with that, I'm going to give a motion here for an RSA that is substantially more than what the TC recommended, not necessarily because what the TC recommended was not well thought out, but I think we have to weigh all the factors here and potentially give the industry the opportunity to, one, collect a little bit more data, as well as give us, let them see for themselves what the condition of the stock is. So I'm going to move to maintain the commercial harvest moratorium in 2025 and develop an RSA pilot winter sampling program to be implemented in 2025 with an RSA quota set at 26.5 metric tons.
That's moved by Mr. Glenn and seconded by Mr. Adam. Is there any discussion from the section on this motion? Does he want to speak to the motion? I'm going to, he's already did. Would you like to speak to the motion? Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having been involved in this, I think it's probably my 28th year that I've been involved with this section, and we're doing what we've done somewhat in the past, where we've listened to the AP, we've listened to the technical committee, and we've always tried to reach some sort of a middle ground. And I think the figure of 26.5 metric tons, I won't say it's middle ground, but I think it's a logical place for us to be. I also, having been involved in the moratorium now for over 10 years, we're going to extend the moratorium, but yet we're going to prosecute unlimited RSA. And that's giving it thought. I think it's time that we did go out and let the fishermen not determine, but show us that maybe there is some, or there aren't any shrimp out there. Also, in Katie Drew's presentation, I think she showed that there didn't seem to be any juvenile shrimp, no 1- and 2-year-olds showing. So there must be hopefully a fair amount of 4- and 5-year-old shrimp, and those are going to be expiring in short term. So I don't see that even if they caught the 26.5 tons, that they would be doing a lot of harm to the fishery. So therefore, I think I'm willing to go along with the 26.5 number. I saw Megan, and then I have Sheree Patterson.
Oh, no, I was just pointing at the screen.
The screen was dead. Having quite a day with technology.
Technical issues again. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, that's fine.
You need that?
No, I don't. I'm gonna just have it come to me. No, I want to speak in support of the RSA overall. I think we have had an erosion of our fishery independent data. Obviously erosion of fishery independent data. We don't have a fishery, so there's no dependent data. And I think we're hearing from industry that they feel like there's a disconnect between what the surveys are showing and maybe changes in the behavior or the movement of shrimp. So I think this is an important gut check for all of us. We all have different ideas of what will happen, but that's why we're doing it. In terms of the number, I appreciate the 2 other states putting this number forward. I think it's important to have something to work with, and particularly to get a sample size so that outliers are not driving the discussion or the narrative of what happens. I think if we had gone with 6.7 metric tons, I was really nervous that, if there's 2 weeks of fishing and you find shrimp both weeks, that's a very different picture than being able to go 4 weeks and you find shrimp 2 out of 4 weeks. The same amount of shrimp are caught in both situations, but the story is quite different. So I do think that ability for some sample size and fishing over multiple weeks is important to make sure we're getting a robust picture of what they're seeing. So I'm in support.
Anybody else on the section want to comment? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
would
Ray.
like to thank ASMRC staff, in particular Katie Drew, for the TC report. But after listening to the AP this morning, and for all the reasons stated, whether they exist or they don't exist, I think this is a moderate approach to this.
All right, are there any public comments from people?
I just want to say thank you. This is a good proactive approach. Fishermen had a lot of doubts. And pretty much what I've been hearing from all of our members with our organization. You know, we've been seeing things everywhere. Fishermen do talk to each other. I know it's a hard time talking to state and federal, but I think this is a good approach. I do appreciate it.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody online? Okay, I'm going to try this the easy way. You need a caucus. No? No? No?
We're not gonna.
All right, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes by unanimous consent. So now we're down to item 7 on the agenda, and that's to consider approval of draft amendment 4 for public comment.
John, before we get off of this, can we just set a plan for like what our intention of when do we need to have this mapped out by, for you all? And just have a general line, a sense of like, when you want to start time.
Sure. So in terms of the process, we have a solicitation that's drafted that we can get out quickly to start that process, because with the holidays, I just don't want us to get too far behind. So we would hopefully get that out within a week, just to see number of interested participants and potential regions they would want to fish, gear type, things like that. And then we need to issue a special license to basically exempt them from the moratorium. We can't do that until we know the participants, but we also have that drafted, so it shouldn't be too much of a jump to go from once we know the participants to having the special license. I think just to do that, I want to set expectations in the room. I don't think January 1, or we have all that done. My hope is like late January, definitely by February, you guys would be out there, but I just want to be honest about the process.
As far as the actual data, I think February, end of February, March, middle of February, at least 1st of February would be, you get the data you need. You're probably going to catch it more, I would suggest. I would predict.
I think if other states are soliciting or planning to solicit, that would be good to know. Obviously, we're just going to solicit for Maine permitted individuals. But if you guys do get participants.
We have 1 or 2, but I think we can set it up pretty quick.
I think, yeah, I've heard, so I was planning to keep the regions, but maybe modify one of the boundaries, just the Mohegan line. Maybe we can move that a little, but I do like the general setup of the regions. And then we see in the solicitation, we have it set up so you can say a preference for a region. So we'll see who we get for what regions.
I guess my question is do you want to send it back, like with this cap, do you want to send it back to the TC to say do you any other advice, or are you guys happy to figure out amongst the states that are going to participate how to set up the.
You talk about like a daily trip.
If you want to have daily trip, do you guys want to talk amongst you'll work it
I
out.
think we need to send it back
Yeah.
to the TC.
And my only question from a standpoint is probably the trip limit. Potentially, if you have like a daily, a weekly base, you'd have to have it similar.
Yes.
I think you need to have some kind of board or section approval of that.
I think that's sort of where I'm going. If we're going to have a that it probably would be good for you guys to propose one, and then we can do an email vote, or you can just agree as a section that the 3 states will get together and agree on a common set of measures for the RSA that any participating state would utilize.
I would think that we would probably, Megan would probably use the blueprint of what we have done previously, especially the years that we had a similar size RSA. I think that just fill in a couple of blanks and.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would start with, I'm kind of doing math here as we go, but with the 1,200, 500 pound trip limit, I would just want to think about number of days a week. I want to do some math on that. And some of that's a number of participants, but for you all, that's generally what I'm thinking. And I'm happy to obviously confirm that with you if you have participants, but confirm that with you guys as well.
When you talk about days of the week, would it not be a good idea to allow fishing during a week, let's say 1 day or 2 days, let them pick the days because of weather considerations, rather than, we wouldn't want to say that Gary Libby's got to go out Monday or Tuesday when it's going to be stormy versus later in the week. That's just a thought. I don't know if we did that before or not, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say of the 5 weekdays, you could choose 2 or something like that. It's my initial thought. I haven't done any math on what that means.
We trust you.
Then we also have to think about the trawl versus trap scenario.
Yeah, we won't have any trappers down our way.
Yeah.
We did have an interest.
You did?
Yeah,
I'm not putting any more vertical lines in the water. That's a heck no for Massachusetts.
Mine are only state waters.
yeah, to be in state waters and we don't have the closures.
They've got to have the weight break.
So, but that would be something that we need to also talk about for trip limits or daily limits or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to do the 500 pound drop limit.
Oh, okay.
Would it be helpful for me to send the final reports from the previous programs around the sections, and they have all the quotas, what's called, the trip limits, how many days a week, trap limits, locations, and I can send that to the section members of that committee. Be a good starting point for.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So my other thing is then the states will take care of determining who is the participants versus the commission, because we've done it ways, and that's what I also wanted to clarify. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Particular.
That's even better.
Got it.
I'll let you know.
Thanks.
We're comfortable with this action, with just letting 2 states work for 3 states. We need to, it comes to something, we need to, once you come up with that, have a section, email, poll vote saying yes or no.
Yeah, that's
fine.
The 3 of us can caucus and work up a proposal and share it, and you guys can.
We will be transparent.
Yeah,
Yes.
that makes sense.
We know what's going on. Okay? So.
Great. Sorry.
I'll
to interrupt.
No, that was very good. I was gonna do that after this, but it makes more sense to do it now. So now we're ready to move on to draft amendment 4. Sharice, oh, you ready?
I have a motion,
Oh.
unless you guys want to do the
I
presentation.
think they're gonna do it.
I'm ready for the motion.
No pressure, Chelsea.
Now that the tech is working.
Yeah.
Be as sassy as possible. So today we're gonna talk about draft amendment 4. I'm gonna give some background, which I think most of us are familiar with. Review the draft options. Okay. Yeah, I will stop this way. And some other potential updates to the draft amended text that the section has not yet seen, but may wish to change before approving the document for public comment. So Amendment 4 was initiated in about a year ago in December 2023, after the 2023 data update showed no improvement in stock status with new time series lows in recruitment, abundance, and biomass, despite the northern shore stock being in moratorium since 2014. At that point in time, section had been grappling with how to best manage the species for a while. However, the setting of multi-year moratoriums is currently not allowed per the FMP requirements, where the current regulations state that section only has the ability to set a closed season annually up to 366 days. And the only way to modify this provision is through an amendment to the FMP. At that time, the section was also interested in exploring the idea of management triggers, which would define a management response that was tied to specific biologic and/or environmental indicators. So up on the screen is a timeline for the development of draft amendment 4, where today the objective of the meeting is for the section to approve draft amendment 4 for public comment. And if the document is approved today, public comment would occur and public hearings would occur between January and March of 2025. And the section could consider final approval in the spring of 2025 for implementation later in that year or in early 2026. So there are 10 sections listed in the draft amendment. Sections highlighted in bold are going to be reviewed in the most detail today. And then moving right into the options under consideration. So I'll first just list out all of the options and then I'll go through each section in more detail. So draft amendment 4 considers 4 separate sets of options, and the first 2 sets of those options deal with extended moratoriums and closed seasons. Those are sections 4.1.1, fishery specifications and total allowable catch, and section 4.1.3, which is the fishing season. The third set of options relates to the addition of management triggers to the FMP located in section 4.1.13. And the fourth set of options adds the specification setting timeline and management triggers to measures that are subject to change through adaptive management, meaning these items could potentially be altered through an addendum in the future rather than amendment to the FMP, and those are listed in 4.5.2.2. So going through the options in more detail for section 4.4.1, fishery specifications and total allowable catch, there are 2 options under this section where option A is the status quo approach, which represents the current management process of annual specifications. So the section would be each year to set a fishing season or extend the moratorium. That is a requirement that a section must meet each year. Option B considers an extended specification setting timeline only for closed seasons. And so in option B, there are 3 sub-options, and those just define the length of time that a moratorium or closed season could be set for. When developing draft amendment 4, the PET thought it would be appropriate to extend the specification setting timeline for moratorium years, but that if there was a fishery, that specification should occur annually. So these options are only for closed seasons. And so the sub-options for option B include option B1, which allows for 2-year moratoriums, sub-option B2, which allows for 3-year moratoriums, and sub-option B3, which allows for 5-year moratorium. And again, during moratorium years, the section would meet at least once, but if a member of the section wanted to call a section meeting at any time, they could choose to do so. That is something that happens regardless of draft or any of these options. So section 4.1.3 outlines options for the fishing season. So this is very similar to the options that I just covered. It just specifies the maximum open and closed seasons in the plan. So option A again is the status quo option where the maximum length of the closed season is 1 year or 366 days. And so option B under 4.1.3 outlines extended closed seasons and includes 3 sub-options for, again, 2-year closed seasons, 3-year closed seasons, and 5-year closed seasons. It's also important to note, again, that none of the sub-options under option B or fishing season allow for extended open seasons for the reasons mentioned earlier. Section 4.1.13 of the document is the management trigger section. So again, option A is status quo. So if option A is ultimately selected, this section would be entirely removed from Amendment 4, as management triggers are not currently used in the FMP. And then option B outlines 2 sub-options for management triggers. And if approved for public comment when taking final action on Amendment 4, the section would have the ability to implement both triggers, so the recruitment trigger and the temperature trigger, or choose between the two if one is preferred to the other. And then for inspection request back in September, option B also includes a provision for the incorporation of new data into a management trigger. So sub-option B1 is the recruitment trigger, where 3 consecutive years of non-failed recruitment would trip the trigger. And that non-failed recruitment is defined as a recruitment value above the 20th percentile of the reference period for both the Maine, New Hampshire, and Northeast Fisheries Science Center surveys, where the strength of that year class persists through subsequent years. And if this trigger were to be tripped, it would prompt a full stock assessment update with projections to inform the potential for a fishery in future years. The PDT discussed that there is a possibility in the future that one of our remaining 2 surveys goes offline temporarily, so they did include, some potential paths forward if that happens. So under the recruitment trigger, if one of the remaining surveys goes offline temporarily or whatever source of data is being used in the trigger at that time, the trigger could be tripped if 5 of the 6 recruitment values are above the 20th percentile, meaning that both surveys showed non-failed recruitment in 2 years, and the remaining survey showed non-failed recruitment in that 3rd year. If the survey were to go offline for greater than 1 year, the trigger could be tripped if 4 of the 6 values are above the 20th percentile, meaning both surveys showed non-failed recruitment in 1 year, and the remaining survey showed non-failed recruitment in the final 2 years of the evaluation period. So again, if both surveys are online, there's 6, different points of being above the 20th percentile for the 3 years, and this should outline the process where the survey would temporarily be unavailable, and trigger could still be used with the information that we have. And then the final aspect that the PDT wanted to add into the management trigger was if both surveys remain online and the trigger has not been tripped, but recruitment has been above the 20th percentile for 2 consecutive years, it would prompt the section to consider reopening the winter sampling program without the use of the size sorting grades. So through removing the size sorting grades, the TC could assess the stage, length, frequencies, and year class persistence of the northern shrimp stock before commencing a full assessment update. And so if that winter sampling program were to run and the TC found perhaps unfavorable conditions, they may, and there's that 3rd year, then we can decide where to go from there and what the potential for a fishery is. So that wraps up the recruitment trigger, and sub-option B2 represents the temperature trigger. So the section tasked the plan development team with developing an environmental-based trigger, and the PDT's response to this environmental trigger is the temperature trigger. So for the temperature trigger to be tripped, 2 out of 3 years in a 3-year evaluation period must show winter surface temperatures and spring bottom temperatures below the 80th percentile of the reference period. So cooler, generally cooler temperatures. If this trigger were to be tripped, it would prompt the section to consider reopening the winter sampling program without the size sorting grades to provide information on recruitment. The PDT thought that the temperature alone would not be enough to trigger a full assessment update, but would be a good trigger for the winter sampling program if the program is not currently running. That way, the section can pass the TC, section and the TC can check in on the stock before commencing a full assessment update. And one thing that's important to note with the both triggers, while, they suggest a triggering of the winter sampling program, the section can run the winter sampling program as part of the regular specifications process. The trigger is not needed. The trigger just serves as an indication that something may be happening where if the program is not running, the section may wish to start it up. So there's a lot of different triggers and responses to triggers happening in the document, so I had to summarize it all on one slide here. And what if the section chooses to implement both triggers, what the response would be if each or both of them were triggered. So in summary, if the recruitment trigger is reached, just the recruitment trigger, it would prompt a full stop assessment update. If just the temperature trigger is reached, the section would consider running the winter sampling program without the high shortage rate. If neither trigger is reached, but recruitment is above the 20th percentile of the reference period for 2 consecutive years, and full surveys are high, the section would consider running the winter sampling program. And if both triggers are reached, it would prompt a full stop assessment update, and again, the section could choose to run the winter sampling program without those size sorting grades. So the last provision under option B is the provision for the incorporation of new data. So this provision provides a way for new data such as industry-based research to be incorporated into the management trigger in the future through section action without the need for a management document. And this provision also allows for the trigger thresholds. So as they are right now, those 20th and 80th percentile thresholds to be updated in the future without the need for a management document. But if there was a desire to change anything else about the trigger, such as the trigger response, that would need a management document. It just applies to the data included, so the 2 surveys and those thresholds. So the process for that would be if new information becomes available to inform the triggers or trigger thresholds, the section would task the technical committee to conduct an evaluation of this new information. The technical committee would then return back to the section with a recommendation, and the section could then modify the data used or the thresholds through section action, so just through a vote. And so moving on to adaptive management, this is the last set of options in draft amendment 4. 4.5.2.2 is the section heading number for those following along in text. And this is measure subject to change through adaptive management. So the list on the screen here are the current FMP requirements of changes that can be accomplished through the addendum process. This would represent the status quo option, which is option A. But back in September, the section indicated that they would like the option to change the specification setting timeline in the future through an addendum rather than an amendment to the FMP. So that is reflected in option B of this section. The last 4 items in bold on the right-hand side are the items that have either been added or modified in this option. So in option B, we add the specification setting timeline and fishing season to things that can be changed through an addendum. We have management triggers or anything under a management trigger that can already be changed through the new data provision will be added to things that can be changed through an addendum. And the last bullet is already included in the status quo option. It's just been slightly modified. So it now reads any other management measures included in Amendment 4. And that just provides the section a little bit more flexibility to make changes to the plan through the addendum process, which is a little bit quicker than the amendment process. So that wraps up the options under consideration, and I'm now going to just walk through some other considerations for Amendment 4 that the section may wish to discuss today and potentially modify before approving the document for public comment. So other considerations that we're going to highlight briefly are the objectives of draft amendment 4, the annual assessment section, a very brief note about one of the habitat sections, and the alternative state management regime section, or also known as conservation equivalency. So for section 2.3 of the document, which outlines the objectives of Amendment 4, the section didn't task the DET with refining the objectives of the FMP, but given the current status of the stock and the fishery, the section may wish to refine these objectives before approving the document for public comment, or you may wish to leave that the same. I realize that text is a little bit small on the slide here. Current objectives are going to be listed over the next few slides, and I will read them aloud for those that maybe can't read from the back of the room. So the current objectives are to protect and maintain the northern strip of stock at sustainable levels that will support viable fishery, optimize utilization of the resource within the constraints imposed by natural distribution of the resource, available fishing areas, changing environmental conditions, and harvesting, processing, and marketing capacity. Provide a mechanism for unique management of fishing effort. Maintain the flexibility and timeliness of public involvement in the Northern Shrimp Management Program. Maintain existing social and cultural features of the fisheries to the extent possible. Minimize the adverse impacts the shrimp fishery may have on other natural resources. Minimize the adverse impacts of regulations, including increased costs to the shrimp industry and the associated coastal communities. Promote research and improvement in the collection of information to better understand northern shrimp biology, ecology, population dynamics, and responses to changing environmental conditions. And achieve compatible and equitable management measures through coordinated monitoring and law enforcement among jurisdictions throughout the fishery management unit. So just an overview of the objectives, and if there's a wish to make changes to any of them, we can provide that today. And if not, then we can leave it as is. So the next item that has some modifications is the annual assessment section. You do not need to read all the text on the screen. That is the way it's currently written, and I will walk through the proposed changes. So changes to this section just provide the TC with a little bit more flexibility in how the stock is assessed in the future, given the uncertainty in the future of northern shrimp data and the surveys we have left, and the potential for multi-year moratoriums. So the way that this section is proposed to be altered, it just, instead of stating that the stock will be reviewed annually through data updates alone, it provides the TC some more flexibility to say that the stock will be reviewed annually through either a data update, a stock assessment update, benchmark stock assessment, or any new method of stock evaluation developed by the technical committee. So again, just providing some more flexibility in how the TC can give an annual update each year. And that is proposed change to the annual assessment section, which will also be renamed stock assessment. The third section of proposed changes is section 4.3.2, the habitat restoration, improvement, and enhancement section. And this just needs the addition of 1 to 2 sentences that reflect what is written in the commission's approved fish habitats of concern designations for fish and shellfish species document, which was approved back in January of 2024. The meaning of the text will not change. There's no, it just is updating that to reflect what is in that approved fish habitats of concern document. The section doesn't have it yet, so we wanted to highlight it today. And then the final and most substantial change to the draft amendment that the section should discuss before approving the document for public comment today is section 4.4, which is alternative state management regimes. And so the way that this section is written in Amendment 3 and currently in Amendment 4 does not reflect the Commission's updated conservation equivalency guidelines, which were approved back in October 2023. And so the following slides will highlight some proposed changes to these sections to bring that conservation equivalency guidelines in line with what is recommended by the Commission. But it is the section's prerogative to deviate from that recommended guidance if there are aspects of that recommended guidance that the section would like to change. So again, current language on screen, I don't expect you to read it. I'm going to walk step by step exactly what's changing. So in terms of updates to the language, the currently section 4.4 reads, states are required to obtain prior approval of changes to their management program for which a compliance requirement is in effect. And that for which compliance requirement is in effect will need to just be changed to any management measure in the FMP. So previously it was just management measures. You had to submit compliance reports for, but the updated funds are any management measure. So the section is the process change, that second bullet there. The current section just reads, all changes in state plans must be submitted in writing to the section and the commission, either as part of the annual FMP review process or annual compliance reports. This is proposed just to be changed to, all changes in state plans will be submitted to the section chair for formal review by the plan review team. Upon receiving a conservation equivalency proposal, the plan review team will initiate a formal review process outlined in the commission's conservation equivalency policy and technical guidance document 2023. That document does outline a process by which the PRT reviews conservation equivalency proposals. Yes. Take the data. Take the data. Because that document does it all. Yes, it should all take with the, yes, real start. So those are the two language updates. This change on the screen is a proposed addition. It is not currently included in the conservation equivalency guidance in the Northern Shrimp Plan, and it outlines when conservation equivalency is not allowed. So it says that the section will consider if a change in the use of conservation equivalency is necessary after each stock assessment, where conservation equivalency is not permitted if the stock is overfished or depleted unless allowed by a 2/3 majority vote of the section. If the section determines conservation equivalency is not permitted, it would apply to future actions of the section. So again, this would be an addition to the text that's not currently reflected in the fishery management plan, but also if there's something that the section would like to deviate from, you can choose to do that today. This is what is in the updated conservation equivalency guidance. And so that wraps up my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. I know there was kind of a lot of different topics in there, so I'm happy to go back to any slides. Need to review.
Okay, questions on this? If you will forgive me, I'd like to ask a couple questions first before we go to other people. First of all, under sections 1.1 and 4.11 and 4.13, regarding maximum closures. I just want to clarify, because it says maximum closures, if we choose, say, a 3-year maximum closure, the board or the section could still choose a 2-year closure, to choose a 1-year closure, correct?
Yeah, so it's up to
It's up
2
to
years.
you. And then on the recruitment triggers, you talk about some, what happens if we lose temporarily some of our surveys. And particularly it talks about one of these offline, if it's offline greater than 1 year, 4 of the 6 values above 20th percentile to trip the trigger. But what if one of the surveys is off for 3 years? Then you wouldn't have about, as I understand, you wouldn't have enough values no matter what. Is that the intent, that we wouldn't be able to have a trigger in one of the surveys went offline for 3 years in a row? Because don't we basically just have 2 surveys right now?
Yes, so that is the intent. The PUT didn't really have a discussion on if a survey went offline for more than 3 years in a row, and I think that's a little bit where the new data provision comes in. If there was anything else that could inform the trigger, we would
Sure.
hope that it would be included, especially the TC felt that the 2 remaining surveys were important to capture recruitment information because they're not as good as capturing recruitment as the summer survey was. So I don't think they wanted to put themselves in a scenario where they were just relying on one of those 2 surveys in the event that it was extremely overly optimistic or, it's going in the other direction.
No, I was gonna say, if we, I guess we were more optimistic about assuming we would not lose all of these surveys for 3 years. But I think if we get to that, then we could maybe fall back on the section's ability to change the data that are used in the trigger. So I don't know if that would be covered by that, or that is a specific, if this section is like, all right, we were going to be missing this one survey for 3 years, we would like to have the trigger be defined differently. So I think we could add new data or go down to one survey if that was acceptable for them.
We would not have to go to an addendum because we have this mechanism to add new survey data. But if for some reason we don't have that new survey data to fall back on, something. What if we lose the main New Hampshire survey because that depends on federal funding and the ability of those vessels, that vessel to be able to continue to use that survey.
So in that case, I think we would have the option to, would they have the option to, for the section, to change the definition of the trigger? To say, instead of having, we allow them to add data, do we allow them to subtract data?
I think we'd have to have that.
Let me go online and read it.
Let me read the way it's written. That could be, it could be as simple as a wording change instead of new data provision. You could just say data provision, and that would encompass, and it would be a little bit more nuanced than that. We have to go back and read, but that way the section could vote on any data used in the trigger as opposed to just adding new information, but let me read the way.
But you're giving specific 4 out of 6 values, where if you only have 3 values.
So I think in that case, you would probably have to change your you would have, the data provision would come into play, because you can also say we have 4 out of 6 here, but what if we add a new survey, what if we add then we would be like, are we at 4 out of 6, are we at 6 out of 9, are we? So I think we can also have it, maybe change that provision to where we can step back, because there's also, okay, what if we don't, what if we don't lose that survey, what if they change how or when the Northeast Fisheries Science, we did break the survey, we have another year, that kind of stuff. So we may want to make that data provision for the section to be able to change the data both in a positive direction, add new data, but also in a negative direction, take surveys out, change surveys.
Look at it not so much as 4 out of 6 values, 5 out of 6 values, do it as a percentage of values that you have available to you.
I think we would want to, if we're keeping these 2 surveys, I think they're sort of I think you would want to reevaluate how many years and in what direction at the point when you are adding or subtracting data. So this is for our current setup, as opposed to setup, the 4 out of 6 or whatever. And then if we get to the point where we need to remove or add a survey, I think then we would change the numbers. We could do it at that point as opposed to at this point.
As long as we don't have to change it in the document, we won't be able to change it in the event. Right?
I think we can make it clear in the amendment that if we are getting to the point where we're adding or subtracting new data series, that would change our definitions.
Good.
Am I correct? Add
New data provision.
Yeah, I think we're making it clear in the new data provision that would override like 4 to 6 or what, or whatever. That would be specific numbers that they're going to change that trigger definition so that it can accommodate whatever data we're gathering or whatever data we're taking away at the board access.
Yeah, so we would definitely need to add that in, because the way it's currently written, and you want to change the definition, that's an addendum process.
Would it be, I think what you need is if you, but if you use a survey for more than 1 year, the section, you could, depending on how much flexibility you want to give yourselves, you could say the section through its action could reconsider the trigger with TC evaluation or something, like, so that what you're saying is that you go back to the TC for those years where you have lost the survey to reevaluate. You could write it up that way in some way.
That would be good.
Yeah, I think you just need a sentence that says if the survey is offline for 3 or more years,
Yeah.
the board can reevaluate its inclusion in the management triggers via board action.
And we want to make that strictly on the basis of data availability, or what about major changes to the survey? Do we want to have, like, we're allowed the section to add new data if the TC field is appropriate, if the TC comes back to you guys and recommends pulling the survey because of, do we want to give that level of flexibility, or is it strictly about the survey goes away for a set amount of time?
I mean, I would think we would want to be general and not be too prescriptive, because it's hard to anticipate what new data sources may or may not come on and which ones we're going to use. So the extent to which we can give ourselves wiggle room, I think.
If the survey goes away or the survey is no longer compatible, you could say, or something like that.
Or if the TC determines it's not providing scientifically sound, whatever term we want to use.
Yeah.
Useful management.
Survey dimensions have changed.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume that if it's no longer compatible, that it's not applicable.
Yeah.
To shrink.
The only other question I had was on the conservation equivalency, and maybe we should just tactically decide whether those 4 items, under other considerations, just go through those one at a time, once people are through with questions on the main section.
And those are all consistent with the newly approved policy, just so everybody's.
So
You have to.
I'm going to hold off my other question until I'll give other section members the opportunity to ask questions about the document. Megan?
All right, I have a couple, so you can tell me when to go back in the queue. Just for the moratorium specifications, I just want to confirm if we can set a multi-year moratorium, we could also set a multi-year RSA.
So.
That's what I was thinking.
I currently.
I'm sitting between 2 jeans.
I'll link it to the
All right, I'll just say. The way it is worded now, I would say, yes. Oh, you have
Yeah,
research.
perfectly, yes.
You have research. Yes.
I think it might be helpful just to be explicit that that can happen. Like a sentence that says, you can also set multiple year RSAs. My other questions were on the triggers. For the recruitment trigger, my first question was, I don't think I've ever seen a figure of recruitment indices from the Science Center survey or the Maine, New Hampshire survey. And I don't know if we could produce those.
We could. Thinking about that right now. Yes, I think we can go back. I don't know if we ever did, if the TC looked at them. I think we did, but yes, I can definitely provide that maybe for the documents.
Yeah. Because I think a natural question at hearings is going to be when was something last triggered? And the red, white, or not red, white, green, yellow, red figures I find very helpful. And
Yes, I think we can do something like that for
next question was, I noticed for recruitment triggers, it's 3 out of 3 years, and temperature triggers, it's 2 out of 3 years. And I'm just curious to understand why those are inconsistent or different.
I think for the recruitment trigger, it has more to do with the life cycle of shrimp, and the TC thought that for years was a good balance to see persistence through the length frequency or that PDT. And then for the temperature trigger, they thought it could be a little bit less sensitive, just because it's triggering winter sampling program. So if we see 2 years of cold temperature, that may be enough for recruitment to kick off, and that could perhaps be a little bit less sensitive than the 3-year recruitment trigger.
Okay. I may have a comment on that later, but I'll save that. I think my last question is, the first bullet on the triggers, if the just recruitment trigger is reached, we conduct a full stock assessment. Is the only way we get a full stock assessment in the future if we trip the recruitment trigger? No.
So the section can request an assessment update at any time for Schedule 1, but it's just, that's specifically, it would definitely have to trigger it.
Okay.
Otherwise, it'd be at the section.
Okay, and I'm assuming, just to quell people's concerns when I ask this question, I'm not proposing this, but if we never hit like some of these triggers, let's say, the board could still not set a moratorium. Like, are we fully prevented from ever? I guess I'm wondering, do we still have independence of choice, or this is guidance as opposed to requirement?
Exactly, and nothing in the triggers is triggering a fishery or preventing a fishery.
Yeah.
It's more saying there are signals that identify that a fishery may be viable.
Okay. That's it, thank you.
Any other questions about the addendum? You want us to go through the other considerations now?
Yeah, I think that. So if anyone, I mean, we can separate them one by one. For example, the objectives. If no one had changes to the objectives or thought that they were fine as is, I don't think we need to walk by one by one.
Yeah, I mean, it's only if you want to do something different than what was proposed in the
That's why I
document.
want to
Yeah.
make sure that everybody in this section is still comfortable with this.
So I'll caveat this, I'll say in general, I'm comfortable with it. I do think we're in a little bit of conflict with the very first bullet for a stock that is by all accounts depleted and essentially collapsed. It's protect and maintain sustainability. I don't know that we can achieve that, but I also don't know of any FMPs that don't have that as an objective. So we're kind of at, if we're going to continue to manage this, I think we have to leave it in there. I'm not clever enough to come up with any kind of middle of the road words to modify that, but it is a little bit of a red flag, I think.
I mean, it's not required. I don't know if we, that's the one that I sort of red flagged in my mind when I read the document. I was like, I don't really think this is a viable goal at this time, given the status of the stock. And I didn't know if when we took this out for public comment, the public would be like, what are you doing? I mean, yes, of course, we want to have a viable fishery and a normal size stock, but we don't have one right now. And so I don't know if there's like a caveat we should be adding to this, like that recognizes environmental conditions in some way that's similar to the second bullet caveat, or at least acknowledges the environmental conditions may,
Agreed.
I don't know.
I just-
You could just do comma, recognizing environmental, the influence of environmental conditions on stuff.
Something, yeah.
Sounds good for,
Or outside of a moratorium.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, I think something like that, recognizing the uncertainty that environmental conditions affect the stars.
I don't know, it would be good to think of something that does it.
Do you want to?
Recognizing the uncertainty,
I think influence.
the influence of environmental condition has on the stock.
Yeah, uncertainty just, it's.
Yeah, I like, well, I would say, I would argue for uncertainty because influence can go positive as well. It's not always negative.
Yes, it is.
Not always. Not of your black sea bass.
Touche.
Red drum, cobia?
The catch and tarpon at Cape Cod.
Protection, maintenance.
Yeah, I like promote protection because it's saying you're trying, but you might not achieve it. Yeah. Right?
Try to protect.
Yeah.
So you're promoting it from the fishery you don't have.
I know.
I don't know, that's
It's-
gonna be
yeah,
a little bit of.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. We're also not protecting the stock at this point.
Well,
well,
I would not say that, because I think we are protecting what is the stock that's remaining. Or else we wouldn't have these RSAs and such. It's just not a fisher's stock, but it's a stock.
I guess from my perspective, if I thought that the environmental conditions of the Gulf of Maine were likely to change and stock can rebound, I don't know that we could justify having an RSA of that magnitude that we just proposed. I think if we've really, for 10 years with no mortality, the stock hasn't turned around, I would say, I haven't seen anything to suggest that it's going to.
is everybody, section members okay with this change?
Yes.
There's one object. Okay,
Oh, wait. The one who said the influence of environmental conditions.
So that will become an option.
On the stock.
I don't think we can, I think we have to show the change
Yeah, that's.
when we do
Yeah.
changes.
so it would be an option
Yeah,
to change that one section.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else within the objectives? Seeing none, the next one is annual assessment section. There's some proposed new language.
So again, the annual assessment section does provide a little bit more flexibility to the TC and how they evaluate the stock each year. The stock will be evaluated each year, just giving a little bit more space there for potential uncertainties in the future. And if we're okay with this, then we can go ahead and make this change in the document and move on to the next topic. If there's any questions, happy to answer them or clarify further.
Any objections to this change in the section? Seeing none, let's move on. Habitat restoration, some minor edits.
I can pull up the exact language, but they're very, very minor. Just again, reflecting in what in that approved habitat of concern document for the future.
Any, you want to look at it, or are you good with minor edits being done by the PDT?
Yeah.
fine with me.
Good, okay.
Consistent with what you guys already.
Yeah. Finally, alternative state management regime. We need to have a proposed, modifications based on the commission's current conservation equivalency policy and guidance. I'm gonna pose one thought for the section. In my years here, I don't remember there being any conservation and equivalency proposals for Northern Trim, because it was all geared on the three states trying to do exactly the same thing. Can we
Yes, you can.
say no conservation equivalency?
I would not be in favor of that.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm not planning to use it, but I would.
Boy, everyone's like,
Where did that
Any plan can say no conservation equivalency or no conservation equivalency on these specific sections, like our management tools. So yes, you are, and then some plans do that.
But we could do that in the future if we found that we wanted to. Right now, it's going to give us the flexibility to do it on anything with a 2/3 majority vote.
Yeah, I mean, I already needed 2/3 majority vote.
Well, that's the,
Knowing your audience. I was like, I did the math, but then I couldn't remember.
this section never works.
I'll count the 3 every day.
So I guess what I would say is I think what Doug is saying makes a lot of sense. In places where I think conservation equivalency is important is when we have stocks that span really broad areas and the fisheries really have diverse methods, seasonality, and conditions. And I think in cases like that, conservation equivalency is really important. In this case, we have a stock that's by all accounts not only declining, but probably shrinking into smaller and smaller areas of thermal refugia. So I would be a little concerned, given those conditions, that the state would propose something different than what the other two are doing, especially where it's, I don't know. That said, it is mostly prosecuted in state waters, at least for you guys,
You guys could block anything I put forward, right? Like, I'm just being honest about it, right? The main concern with the CE proposal, one of the other states also has to agree to it. So I
so we could
think
at least hear your idea.
that's right, yeah.
Here's your idea. But really, the reason I put that forward was the whole reason a section was created was to get the 3 states to do the exact same thing.
Yes.
In this very, very small northeast United States. So we can either do it by vote or whatever. So then,
I can live with it being in there because of what point that Megan just made. So if that's okay with you, Megan.
Because they'll never be.
I'm fine with it being in there as a consistent policy.
anybody else? Okay,
So just to,
keep it
the
as,
proposed changes are good, no additional regulations, great.
yep.
And that wraps up.
Any other changes? Or
Well, I don't know if it changes. I just wanted to provide some comments maybe. And I'll just say overall, I'm not at this point in love with the management trigger idea. I think it's a little complicated right now. And I'm not sure what it's getting us. Like the section can, if we do multi-year specs, the section can still set an RSA, it can still set a moratorium or a fishery, it can still request an assessment, within reason. So I'm not sure I'm not seeing totally the benefit of it. So I'm not proposing to take it out, but I'm maybe foreshadowing to the section that I'm probably leaning at this point more towards going down the multi-year spec route and not doing triggers because I don't see what it's getting us. Obviously, that may change based on public hearings, but I just kind of wanted to share my thoughts at least as to where I'm at that topic. The only thing I might change or add an option for is I think it's a little weird that the 2 triggers don't have the same trigger. It's like 3 out of 3 or 2 out of 3. So I would propose just creating both of those as options for each trigger. So you could have the same or different for the triggers, but to me, it just felt a little bizarre reading it. I don't know what you guys think of that.
I will qualify that the trigger, when we first started talking about this trigger, we talked about the trigger in the sense of that the section would not have annual updates. That was our goal, was to get away from that. We were trying to like sort of set it and sit on it and come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the section steered away from that, but still indicated they wanted a trigger and annual reviews. So it sort of deviated from its purpose.
Yeah.
You could also add an option to the document. If you aren't sure you want to use one, but that you could come up, like you could establish a trigger at any point using section action, I guess. But I don't know if that's what you want to do, or if you want to take it out for public comment. I mean, obviously you can do either way. But.
I mean, I think a lot of work's gone into it, and my sense is the other states are interested in hearing what folks have to say. So I'm fine keeping it in, and we'll just see what the comments are and, try and find the best path forward. I just kind of wanted to let you guys know, I think it's a little complicated for what we're getting out of it. I could have a different opinion come whenever we take final action, but that's just my concern right now.
I certainly understand why the technical committee proposed it, because of the quality, what each trigger, the data each trigger is using.
Yeah.
And the way I look at this is I could see us coming back every other year on a regular basis, but 10 years from now, if nothing's happened,
Sure.
we may want to set it and forget it for a while.
And I think we can do that via an addendum with this amendment, which I'm all for, having that option.
Question, I guess this question would be for maybe Katie. With that trigger as its current, what's the difference between the recruitment trigger relative to your workload for doing an annual update? The way I read it is that if we were to impose that trigger, your annual update would be generating recruitment indices, but not necessarily having to do either an assessment and or a full data update. Is that accurate, or you still have to do the annual full update?
We would not have to do the annual run of the model, so that's definitely less of a workload. I think it would depend on if the section still wants honestly, if we're doing the recruitment indices, we have to generate that first index to begin with and then apply the length cutoffs. So it's not actually any less work to do the full traffic light versus the recruitment trigger. It's basically just doing the usual traffic light approach and then seeing where those little dots are on the line. So it does not, so doing the trigger doesn't save us any work relative to the traffic light approach or the data update. It does save work both of those save work compared to doing the regular full light structured model update.
And currently that's being done annually.
So right now, the light structured model, we basically only do at the end of a moratorium. So we've been setting a 3-year moratorium of verifying that every year. So basically, and then at the end of that period, coming back and doing the full light structured model. And so I think it's up to the section if they like that.
Whatever interval we set for the end.
End of the, right. So I think technically under the current management framework, you can't set those 3 years but you say our intent is to do it for 3 years. We just have to come back every year to be like, yep, still intend to keep it closed. And then the TC at the end of that 3 years is plans to do these assessment updates. So we said in 2021, the assessment did the full update then. here we are 3 years later, 2024, with a full update again, and this decision.
So based on that, I mean, I do prefer having the recruitment trigger in there, with the caveat that I would lean more towards setting the moratorium length for as long period as possible, because given the stock conditions, I think setting it and trying to minimize the amount of work that on the TC has would be my first priority. Given that, with that, if something happens and all of a sudden we see this recruitment pulse, then it says, okay, well, we have to come back to the table and work on it. So I do like that. I do share Megan's concern about the environmental trigger. One, that the timing is different, but in general, I think because there's a clear relationship between environmental conditions and stock productivity. But we don't know what that exact relationship is. It has an influence, but I'm a little less inclined to, if this temperature is cool for a couple of years, to say, boy, we really need to look at this again. I think that the recruitment trigger takes care of that, because temperature alone is one of the drivers, but not necessarily the only driver. And if, regardless of what the temperature does, if we're looking at the stock recruitment trigger and it jumps up, we're going to know. Whereas if the temperature one changes and the stock doesn't respond, well, then so what? So I guess that my perspective is I could live with it going out to public, to public hearings for comment, but I'm a little skeptical of that one.
And to explain kind of the TC's thoughts on this front, or TC slash PDT, I think the reason we had I can't speak to the 2 years versus 3 years. I think that's up to the section for sure. And, having both of those options would make sense. I think the reason we have sort of a different response to the environmental trigger is you're right, that if the environment is driving that recruitment, we'll see it in the recruitment trigger, and that will carry through to the assessment. But if the environmental triggers, if the environmental conditions improve, but we don't see it the same signal in the stock, then I think doing an assessment update at that point doesn't really make sense, because the model is still going to say, I'm not seeing recruitment. And so we offered this other alternative of, again, maybe the hypothesis is if the environmental conditions are improving, but our surveys aren't picking up on it, let's open up this winter sampling again without that size sorting rate and see if we can get another measure of recruitment, a way of checking on recruitment that doesn't involve the surveys. And so I think the point then in that case would not be to do a full assessment update until after we sort of gone out and see if we can see recruitment in the other form. So you're thinking if the stock is responding to the environment, or even if it's adapted and is now responding to a core environment in a positive way, that will show up in the surveys. But if we just have this recruitment trigger check, or this environmental trigger check with nothing else on the survey side, then you're not going to get better information out by doing a stock assessment, because the stock assessment's going to look at those data and say, recruitment's still terrible, what are you talking about? And so that was kind of why we're offering the environmental as a way to maybe go back to, or try to develop a different data source.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe a way to marry the ideas, I think if I'm understanding, would just be to, instead of for each recruitment or each trigger, there could just be a sentence that the section can select a final action if 2 or 3 consecutive years are needed, or something like that. Just so that I think there's flexibility on both of those, and we can make them more consistent if we would like to at final action.
Just, 2 or 3 years is more appropriate. I think I want to sort of that, which
Okay.
would the section can select. And do you want to limit the number of years that the section can select at final action?
I mean, I think that's the right ballpark.
Yeah. Okay, up to 3 years.
I don't think we're doing it for 1 year.
Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah.
given the life history.
I just want to make sure you didn't want it to be more than 3.
I don't think so. We have 4 years of recruitment, and
Yeah.
my door's been banged down a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, just backing up a little bit. whole idea of this amendment was to keep us from having to meet every year.
It was.
And it almost sounds like we're creating, I won't say more work, but making it more difficult to do our job. I think we've been doing a good job, and I agree with what Megan was saying earlier, that having all these triggers, I don't know, it doesn't complicate it, but I think we're trying to fix something that it's really not so broken. Not for instance, but assuming we pass this and we have an option of 3 years, what happens in the interim? If something happens in the interim, we'd still want to get together and do something, regardless of whether, no matter what. So I just think that, and I appreciate the work that was done by you folks. It's a 140-page document, and it gives you the complete history of shrimp, really. It's very well written, but I just think it's doing a lot of things that aren't necessary, especially on a fishery that's in the state that it is. So I'll go along with whatever we want to do willingly, but I don't know if we're making life easier or more difficult for us and for the staff.
I think that it veered away from this sort of set it, and I'll call it set it, forget it, for lack of a better term, and I like to say that because I think it's fun. But it veered away from that in the sense that the TC doesn't get to set it and forget it anymore. The section can still sort of set it and forget it because the TC can do their quick run and we can send you guys an email saying, we saw no change. Say you choose the option of up to 5 years of moratorium. You only have to meet one time during that 5 years. And the TC can continue to say, we're not seeing any changes. The RSA isn't producing anything wildly crazy. If you've also done a 3-year RSA, we're just going to sit and hold on it. So you don't actually have to meet. You can if you want to. So this document does allow that to happen. Because right now you're still required to meet every year, at least to verify that you are going to continue that moratorium, because we cannot set the moratorium without a verification every year.
And the same would apply to an RSA. We'd have to do that.
Well, yeah, and the RSA allows you to do multiple years of RSA with the moratorium. The only thing that you cannot do multiple years is if you open the fishery, then you have to do that annually right now. So it does hold things back a little bit, but it doesn't pull it back to the TC.
Allison?
Can the RSA change from year to year?
You'd have to meet to change it, but yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any other thoughts on the way the document? And I'll take, if someone has a motion to approve the document. Sheree?
I'd like to move to approve draft amendment 4 to the Northern Shrimp Fishery Management Plan for public comment as modified today.
We have a second. Glenn? We need a caucus. No. Try it the easy way. Any objection to this motion? Seeing none, it approves by unanimous consent. So I guess this means you'll be contacting us soon.
Chelsea?
I got it.
Well,
I was typing, but it wasn't projected.
and I assume you'll be contacting the states
Yes.
soon about.
So I will, make the changes that we discussed in the document, and I will reach out to everyone to schedule hearings sometime in the year. The document doesn't be available for 30 days before the first public hearing, so likely document hearing won't be until sometime in February. Just FYI.
So we won't be able to, we'll have to have another meeting to approve it.
No, it's,
Approve the document?
you just did,
No, I mean,
finalize, yes, finalize, yeah.
Document, so we need 30 days open before the public hearings and 30 days, 14 days after the close of public hearings. So that probably puts us at final action around April, May, so spring of next year.
okay. Sounds good.
We can always meet virtually to approve it. It's up to you guys.
Okay.
That's true.
Why did I ask?
Spring doesn't happen till mid-June here.
Oh, you said black line.
She doesn't know.
High season, right?
Maybe you're already planning on doing this, but if it's possible to get basically an abridged version just with the options, that would be.
Yes. I was thinking of that this morning. I will make like a public FYI document that's just the proposed changes.
Yeah.
Because I have 100 more pages.
Yes.
So you're trying to figure out what's going on.
Thank you so much.
And we are required to do 4 hearings, so we will be doing 4.
Sure, May will come up with a few things.
Sure, I'm happy to.
Like, one of them will be a webinar.
All right, anything under other business? Motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you very much.